People here are certainly breathing a sigh of relief that Donald Trump appears to be less belligerent than he has been in recent days, and indicated that he would not be retaliating for last night's attacks, which were aimed by the Iranians on bases here in Iraq, which have US as well as Iraqi and other soldiers in them. Having said that, he has said that there are going to be more sanctions. And the Iranians, well, you're getting mixed messages. On the one hand, the foreign minister has suggested that last night's attacks completed the operation. On the other hand, there's still a lot of fervour and a lot of fury. And I think it's far too soon to say that that's an end of what the Iranians are going to do to retaliate for the killing of General Soleimani. You know, it's the old thing they say, you know, talk softly and carry a big stick. So far, what the Iranians have done is talk very loudly, but have carried just a small stick, because the attacks on the bases here in Iraq last night, they were really largely symbolic. Iran fired ballistic missiles at 1:20 a.m., the same time that General Qasem Soleimani was blown up in Baghdad last Friday. But the attack on Ain al-Assad base was less deadly, killing neither US nor reportedly Iraqi troops, because the Iranians had given the Iraqi government advance warning. A satellite picture seems to show limited damage to several sections, amongst them an aircraft shelter. This morning, Iraqi forces found missile fragments near Erbil, where another base was hit. Iraqis in the area were cleaning up. They're the thankfully not fatal collateral damage.
At 2 a.m. we heard a very loud sound, and when we walked outside we saw the broken windows and we were terrified. We didn't know that there was an American base nearby. We don't know why they even hit us.
Yesterday, some NATO troops, including US Marines, were choppered out of the green zone in Baghdad. But the bulk remain on 3 bases outside the capital, including those hit. Speaking to an audience in Tehran after the strikes, Iran's supreme leader was greeted by customary chants of death to America.
حالا سیلی دیشب به اینها زده شد. کارهای نظامی به این شکل کفایت اون قضیه رو نمیکنه. اونچه مهمه این است که بایستی حضور فساد برانگیز آمریکا در این منطقه منتهی بشه، تمام بشه.
A few hours before, the body of General Soleimani was finally lowered into its resting place in his hometown of Kerman. The crowds who mourn him may not be satisfied with a slap as the only retaliation for his killing.
We did not start this process of escalation. The United States waged an economic war against Iran. The United States has to come to its senses. The presence of Iranian people in the streets of many cities, unprecedented in the history, a sea of humanity, has to bring the United States to its senses.
The Iranian government says it remains determined to avenge Soleimani's death. Victory is close, they hope. But victory for Iran means US troops abandoning the Middle East completely. And it will take more than a couple of missile strikes to make that happen. Now, the other thing that President Trump said was that there would be even more sanctions on Iran. Now, that does worry people here in Iraq, because this country, since the 2003 American invasion, it's really been pulled between those 2 power bases, the US on the one side and Iran on the other. And it's very dependent on Iran for a lot of goods, also for electricity. A large amount of the electricity here in Iraq comes from Iran. There's a waiver on sanctions at the moment which allows that to happen, but that's up later this month. And if the Americans don't continue with that waiver, well, it's going to go dark here a lot of the time, and that is something that really worries people. People here lived through sanctions under the time of Saddam Hussein. They know what it's like. I was talking to one Iraqi woman today. She said, look, My family and I, we've already changed all our Iraqi dinars into US dollars because we're so worried about the currency losing all its value. People here are very concerned that this is not contained. It's not just Iran and America, it's here. One Iraqi man I spoke to, he said, look, it's like a football match, he said, where you've got these two ferocious sides battling it out. We Iraqis, he said, we're just the pitch.
Lindsay, thanks very much. Jackie.
As long as I'm president of the USA, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. There was no doubt what Donald Trump wanted to emphasize in his televised address this afternoon. After praising US forces for last week's drone strike that killed top Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, Mr. Trump demanded the UK and others walk away from the Iran nuclear deal. Well, our Washington correspondent Siobhan Kennedy joins us now. Siobhan.
Well, Jackie, as you can imagine, everyone was on tenterhooks here in the US, waiting to hear what their president would have to say. He had been making those same fiery threats right up until yesterday afternoon, when he promised that if Iran did strike, that they would be met with severe consequences. Yet today he has clearly sought to bring those tensions back down. But I have to say, those red lines are still very visible. He said that Iran will not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon on his watch, Jackie. But remember, it was he who walked away from the only deal on the table that its supporters said had a chance of achieving that. He's also threatened, as Lindsay was mentioning there, fresh, harsh sanctions against the regime. So while today, yes, we are seeing something of a conciliatory tone from the president here, it is by no means guaranteed that Iran will play ball. After a nervous night, an address to the nation from the grand foyer of the White House, Commander-in-Chief Trump, flanked by his most senior generals and advisers, delivered his response to Iran's ballistic missile attack on American troop locations. Would an unpredictable president call for revenge or call for calm?
The American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime.
And that appears to be the key factor as to whether this crisis would escalate or allow both sides to take a breath.
Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned and a very good thing for the world.
The president announced additional punishing economic sanctions, requested help from NATO in the region, and demanded allies walk away from the nuclear deal with Iran, just as he had done in 2018, sparking this current crisis.
The time has come for the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Russia, and China to recognize this reality. They must now break away from the remnants of the Iran deal, or JCPOA. And we must all work together toward making a deal with Iran that makes the world a safer and more peaceful place.
The response to the killing of that Iranian general has begun.
It didn't feel safe overnight.
At the most dangerous moment in our lifetimes.
As the president watched from the Situation Room, surrounded by his advisors, the first indication of his mood came, unsurprisingly, on Twitter. All is well. Missiles launched from Iran at 2 military bases located in Iraq. Assessment of casualties and damages taking place now. So far, so good. We have the most powerful and well-equipped military anywhere in the world, by far. I will be making a statement tomorrow morning.
Trump brings chaos to the whole world.
Trump lies.
Trump is guilty.
He must be removed.
He must be removed.
On Capitol Hill this morning, protesters lined the corridors.
No war in Iran. Remove Trump.
But Republican senators say these developments are proof of a big win for Donald Trump.
I think he is taking it as an opportunity to not just de-escalate, but start negotiations. This hasn't happened, you guys, since 1979. And so it's a major thing. And I know all those people out there that hate Trump, he's accomplishing something here that is just really magnificent.
If there was ever any doubt that when you're dealing with evil people, weakness invites the wolves. I think the Ayatollah got the message. He's either a really bad shot or he understands if he spills American blood, he will receive great vengeance and furious anger.
But this is by no means mission accomplished.
God bless America. Thank you very much.
This is an unpredictable president juggling a crisis his critics say is of his own making and one that he has repeatedly inflamed. After days of edging towards the brink, now a tentative pause. But will it last?
Siobhan Kennedy there. Well, joining me now from New York is Ian Bremmer, the president and founder of Eurasia Group, a political risk research and consulting firm. And from Erbil in Iraq is the journalist Hiwa Osman, who served as an advisor to former president of Iraq, Jalal Talabani. Thank you both for joining me. Ian Bremner first. Has President Trump, whether by accident or design, pulled off a significant victory here?
Well, he has today. Of course, let's keep in mind that this was self-imposed. I mean, the reason that there's been escalation from the Iranians over the last number of months has been because the United States decided, President Trump decided, to unilaterally withdraw from the Iranian nuclear deal. All of the American allies, including, of course, the United Kingdom, opposed that. And when the Iranians couldn't get anyone to still work with them and do business with them under the terms of the deal, because the United States is much more powerful, they started to escalate, including even hitting 50% of Saudi's oil. They were taken basically offline. And so finally, the Iranians started hitting the Americans directly. Then you saw this very significant hit from Trump last Friday, killing Qasem Soleimani, and the Iranians have indeed backed down substantially. The last weekend, the last 72 hours, I think reflects a tactical win for Trump. There is an opportunity to engage in negotiation now, and long term, that opportunity should be taken. But again, it's important to put it in context, because we wouldn't be where we were in the last 72 hours if Trump hadn't pulled out of that deal.
I mean, there's speculation that this last 24 hours has been a little bit of theatre, perhaps, from both sides. You know, the US say they were warned, no Americans were killed. President Trump said there was minimal damage to the bases. Is it possible that this is some sort of slightly elaborate theatre so that both sides can now back down, pull away from escalating the crisis?
I think it's really one-sided. There's no question that people are saying in the United States Trump got lucky, and it's true, but it's a lot easier to be lucky if you're the most powerful country in the world, if you're the president with the most powerful military. And so I just think the realities of asymmetry really matter. The Iranians didn't understand where the red lines were. When they hit the Saudis, not only did Trump not respond, but the Saudis were so unnerved by that, they started negotiating with Iran, and they ended up with a prisoner swap between the two. Clearly, the Iranians thought that the only way they could get the Americans to pay any attention and have a chance of actually getting their economy moving again is by showing that they were willing to escalate. And that really hurt them. They miscalculated, and they also tried to thumb Trump's nose in it, the supreme leader even tweeting that the Americans couldn't do anything about it. Again, the events of the last 48 hours, I wouldn't call it kabuki. I would call it the Iranians recognizing the realities of massive power imbalance between the two countries.
Hiwa Osman, to just bring you in there, the Iraqi Prime Minister had been urging both sides to pull back, warning of a devastating all-out war. How satisfied do you think the Iraqis will be now that, in the words of President Trump, Iran is standing down, that this is, for the moment, over?
Well, it certainly sends a signal to the Iraqi people that Iran, without Qasem Soleimani, is a bit more moderate than the previous one, and probably wiser. A catastrophe could have taken place over last night. But many Iraqis say, thank God, no one died, and it came as a sigh of relief, because had there been serious casualties in this attack, the Americans would have responded with even stronger power, and the arena of all of this would have been Iraq. So the main collateral damage would have taken place on Iraqi soil and by Iraqi people, and this would have been catastrophic for quite a lot of Iraqis, and it would have derailed the demonstrations and the calls for reform process that are taking place in the various areas of Iraq against those who are today in government and are mostly on the Iranian side or backed by the Iranians.
I mean, in the early days after the assassination of Soleimani, Iran had vowed severe revenge. Will all Iranians be satisfied that this strike is in fact enough?
Well, contrary to the expectations, the revenge seems to be quite mellow, as some Iraqis were describing it today. And if this was it, I think this will be time to start negotiations between the two countries. And in addition to the various other issues that they discuss, I think, and many Iraqis believe, that discussing Iraq and each side's involvement with Iraq should be put down on paper and not be done in closed rooms or through third parties like proxies of this side, or people who are closer to America, or people who are closer to Iran, or through intermediaries like Iraqis. I think the two countries today should decide on each one's standing on Iraq. It could be a topic for negotiations between the two countries, should they start negotiations again.
And Ian Bremmer, we heard President Trump, something of a roller coaster of a speech today, you know, tough rhetoric, we won, you lost, you'd expect a bit of that. But at the same time, some pulling back, offering something of an olive branch to Iran, saying to the people, we want you to prosper and thrive. So what is next for President Trump, do you think, here?
He wants negotiations. This is a president not inclined to wag the dog, try to start a war in order to win re-election. This is a president inclined to pet a dog. In other words, trying to come up with deals that shows that he's the best deal maker in the world, even if the deal isn't all that much. And he's tried through the French president, through the Japanese prime minister, through the Swiss president, the Qataris, the Kuwaitis. He's tried to engage directly with the Iranian president. And thus far, the Iranian president's had none of it. He said, no, not unless you go back to the old deal. Well, after this climb down, I suspect the Iranians will be much more willing to engage in negotiations. And they're going to have to give more than what they had with what was a limited nuclear deal with Obama. Some of that is about the 10-year time frame and ending the sunset clause. Some of it is about expanding it to include things like ballistic missiles, which are under sanction, and the Iranians just demonstrated that they have and they use just last night. But I do think that if you ask me, looking forward to the end of 2020, are we closer to war or are we closer to negotiations? We're actually quite a bit closer to negotiations. Bringing those negotiations home for this Trump administration, of course, is a challenge of a very different order.
Ian Bremmer and Hiwa Osman, we have to end it there, but thank you both for joining us. Thank you. Kathy.
Thanks, Jackie. Well, Boris Johnson has spoken in public for the first time about the Iranian crisis since returning from his Caribbean holiday. At Prime Minister's questions, he condemned last night's missile strikes and backed President Trump's decision to kill General Soleimani, who he said had the blood of British troops on his hands. But the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, questioned whether his killing in a foreign territory had been an illegal act. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, reports.
His first public appearance in 17 days. His first on-camera response to the US killing of Iran's top general.
Most reasonable people would accept that the United States has a right to protect its bases and its personnel.
It was close to a full endorsement of the Americans' killing of a man he said had many crimes to his name.
Supplying improvised explosive devices to terrorists who, I'm afraid, killed and maimed British troops. That man had the blood of British troops on his hands.
Surely, killing somebody in a foreign territory is an illegal act and should be condemned as such.
The Prime Minister said the government was trying to stop the crisis escalating and to be a bridge between the EU and the US.
The UK will continue to work for de-escalation in the region. I think we're having a great deal of success in bringing together a European response and in bridging the European response with that, of course, of our American friends, and working both with the Iranians and with the Iraqis to dial this thing down.
Only a few hours before President Trump called for Britain and the EU to abandon the Iran nuclear deal, Boris Johnson said Britain still backed it.
We think that after this crisis has abated, which of course we sincerely hope it will, that way forward will remain. It is a shell that is currently being voided, but it remains a shell into which we can put substance again.
Whitehall does not think the overnight missile attacks from Iran on US bases in Iraq is the last test of Western nerve and unity. It expects more attacks directed from Tehran, but carried out by others.
The Iranians have got militia forces who take instructions from Tehran all over the region. So they've got many forces in Iraq, they've got militia forces operating in Syria, they've got Hezbollah in Lebanon, they've got militia forces, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and in Afghanistan too, it has to be said. And if you add on to that the military dispositions of British and American forces, then there's an awful lot of potential targets that can be made to feel pretty uncomfortable if they stay there. They're instructing their militias to do it, so they keep this plausible deniability.
That's how they like to operate.
They like it. Last night was the first time that they've said, we have attacked America. They never normally say that. They attack America and then say nothing to do with us.
And now they revert, you think, to their normal way of doing things?
They revert, in my view, back to plausible deniability. So
but possibly with much bigger acts.
I suspect so.
All of which could bring Iran a great prize. 17 years after the invasion of Iraq, removing all remaining Western forces from that country.
If the Americans and the British, for that matter, can't get out of their bases safely, then all they can do is hunker down and protect themselves. And people in the West will say, why are they there? What good are they doing? And in reality, I think the military mission to Iraq is now probably at an effective end.
The wreckage of General Soleimani's car after Friday's attack, a moment with still untold repercussions for forced deployments, alliances and conflict.
3 Britons are known to be among the 176 people who died when a Ukrainian International Airlines plane came down shortly after taking off from Tehran airport. It's still not clear what caused this morning's crash, which came just hours after the Iranian missile strikes. The airline says the Boeing 737 plane was only 3 years old and had recently been serviced, as Parrick O'Brien reports.
This footage purports to show the last moments of flight PS752. The person filming exclaims, "The plane is on fire." Then, moments later, it crashes into the surrounding countryside. The crash site up close, burning debris spread over a very large area. This is just a few miles from Tehran airport, where the Ukrainian International Airlines flight took off, bound for Kiev. And, with sunrise, a sense of the scale of the tragedy. The plane broken up into thousands of fragments, scattered across gardens, fields, houses. There were 176 people on board, mainly from Iran and Canada. No one survived. One eyewitness said that in the last few seconds the pilot managed to steer the plane away from a built-up area.
The only thing that the pilot managed to do was steer the plane towards a football field here, instead of a residential area back there. It crashed near the field and in a water canal.
The plane came down hours after Iran's missile attack targeting bases in Iraq housing US forces. There is, at this point, no direct evidence that the two incidents are related. Iranian media immediately blamed technical problems, but the Ukrainian president warned against, quote, speculation until official reports were completed. Ukraine International Airlines flight PS752 took off from Tehran bound for Kiev shortly after 6 local time this morning. The last recorded signal came from the plane only minutes later at 8,000 feet, 12 miles from the airport. Shortly afterwards, it crashed into a field in the suburbs of Perand. The plane was a Boeing 737-800 delivered to the Ukraine Airlines in 2016. It was not the Boeing 737 MAX grounded worldwide after 2 fatal crashes.
If you're a UK passenger and you've flown with Ryanair recently, this is what you've flown in. They're good airplanes, they've got very reliable engines, the CFM56.
And crucially, this was a new one.
This was a new one, 3.5 years old.
The reliability of the plane and the experience of the crew have fueled speculation that something external brought the plane down. Throughout the day, family and friends of passengers showed up both at the crash site outside Tehran and at Kiev airport. There were 3 British passengers on board. Engineer Syed Tomasebi Kadamisadi, here with his new wife Nelifer, who was with him on the plane. Mohammed Reza was also a passenger, as was Sam Zakai from southwest London. Also among the dead, the 9 crew members, just some of the 176 lives lost.